Okay, let's get this straight. Your long arm quilting, that is. Let's make sure that your quilt is nice and square and doesn't travel in your frame. Also, if you're doing a panel quilt, you want to make sure that's perfectly square. There are a couple of quick tips that I'm going to give you in today's video. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Susan Anderson, and this is Susan So Creative. And we're here today going to help you keep your quilt from traveling, or if you're doing a panel quilt or would like to do a panel quilt, to make sure that it stays straight. Lots of good tips to go on today, and some you use, some you won't. That's okay, but something that'll help you around.
Before you ever put your quilt together, you will need to cut out your panel and block it, pinning it to a June Taylor blocking board, steaming it and allowing it to dry. This will set the block and make it perfectly square for you to start your piecing.
So I have my horizontal channel lock on, I have baste selected, I have my move selected, and I'm going to touch my right arrow to stitch across the top of my quilt. So it gives me a line of stitching in a straight line going clear across the top of my quilt. So now I can position my quilt top right along that stitching line so that I get it perfectly straight. Tip I'm going to give you is a 0 center tape measure. I've used double-sided tape to stick it to my stationary bar at the back of my frame. This is going to make sure that I can align up my edge of my quilt with the same number each time. And to help me remember, here's my next tip. Painter's tape is your friend. I'm going to make sure that this aligns correctly with right where I have the edge of my quilt. And I'm going to do this to the other side of my quilt as well. That way I'm going to have both edges lined up perfectly as I go through my quilt. Here's my next tip. Superior makes a washout thread, so does Wonderfill. This is great for basting. And when you're trying to get a quilt very straight, like a panel quilt, where you might need to do some stitching down the center of your quilt, and you don't want to have to take that out when you're done, this will actually go ahead and you just spritz the quilt and it will disappear. I partially wound a bobbin. Now when I wound a bobbin with this, because it's a delicate fiber, it breaks very easily. I've taken my speed down to 2 on my bobbin winder, and I've only partially wound a bobbin because I don't intend on stitching the whole quilt with this. That would be kind of ridiculous. I'm just going to do the basting. Here's another tip. I've switched over to my 1/4 inch square foot to do my basting along with my washout thread in my needle and bobbin. And I'm going to start by basting along the edge of my quilt first. Remember, I've set the blue painter's tape at each side so I can get them perfectly straight and aligned as I travel through my quilt. That allows me to get a perfectly straight line to my stitching and my edge. Again, I hit the channel lock, the move, and this time I use the up arrow. Now let's do the other side. After we've done the sides of the quilt with the basting thread, I'm now going to go across the top. Again, I've got my channel lock and my horizontal. I have my baste selected and I have my move selected. I'm now going to go ahead and press my right arrow to baste across the top of my quilt. I'm going to baste up the side of my panel just as long as it's on the top of my frame, and I'm going to again just press my move, making sure I follow the line. Remember, this is a washout thread, So even though I'm in the center of my quilt, I don't have to worry about taking it out or ripping out anything at the end. You'll never even see it. Now I'm going to go horizontal across. Now I've already checked it to make sure that it was horizontal. I basted the other side in case you didn't know. I did the sides first, and now I'm going to go across the top. And what this is going to do is, again, keep my panel nice and straight. Now if you want to check it, lock your quilt, your long arm machine into the horizontal and just move it sideways to see if it goes right along the top of your panel. If it is, then you've got it nice and straight. You might as well go ahead and baste it. Now I'm not going to baste the entire frame or the entire quilt because as the piece is quilted, it will draw up. But I will go through and baste as I go to make sure that center panel and the edges of my quilt are perfectly straight. If you don't want to actually baste the center panel or your panel, wherever it happens to be, in your quilt as you're quilting, you can do a channel lock each time you do an advance and do a vertical right along the side to see that it's perfectly straight before you start your quilting. That will still align it, it just means that you won't be basting it. But to get started, I like basting it across the top, making sure that first line is perfectly dead center. When advancing your quilt on an edge-to-edge design, I like to pick either a point closest to the bottom of my stitching, or in this case, I've chosen a cross point because I know it's exact. If I choose the lowest position, that would be somewhere on the loop itself of this design, and the problem with that is it's harder to line up on a loop. So I've chosen where the stitching crosses, and I'm now going to go ahead and click drag, and I'm going to touch drop. Now I'm ready to do my basting again. Again, hit my vertical, and I'm just going to travel that down, making sure that the quilt is lined up where it needs to be. Finally got to the bottom of my panel quilt, and I wanted you to see that if I lock in my horizontal channel locks, the bottom edge of my quilt is perfectly straight. That's how you keep your quilt in line and getting everything so that you don't have a quilt that is cattywampus and your panel will always be straight. Another tip you might find helpful is getting a second hand wheel for your long arm quilter. I use two for making sure that my backing is nice and flat. So I'll roll it all the way up, roll it all the way out, roll it all the way up again to make sure that I got it nice and even tension. I've left the part number for that in the handout too. So make sure you download the handout to get all the tips and all the links for today's video. Hope you enjoyed today's video. It was fun doing it. If you needed to do more basting as you go through, you certainly could use your regular thread that you're doing your actual quilting with on the sides, the top and the bottom. But when going across the middle, as I was showing you earlier, the washout thread makes it very convenient. That way I don't have to rip anything out. So all I have to do is just a little spritz and it's all gone. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have anything you'd like to contribute as far as more things you'd like to see me do on my channel, please drop me a line and I'll see if I can't get it done for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. And remember, it's only wrong if it doesn't work.